Hello and welcome to the UCM Sacred Stage podcast. I'm your host, Minister Tiffany Kiefer, and we have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Reverend Joyce Smith Moore. She is the longest living Reverend member with UCM, and we are so excited to have you. Not only is she a doctor and a reverend and a clinical hypnotherapist, she's also an author. And we get to hear all about that today. Joyce, it is such a pleasure to interview you. You are so interesting, and I'm sure that we are going to be doing more of these interviews just to kind of get to know your whole story. But welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out today.
Nice to be with you. And probably the effort to become an ordained minister, because my sponsor at the time, she was the oldest living medium, Reverend May Merritt.
Wow.
And she was in Binghamton, actually where I was born, but I grew up in Auburn, but spent many years traveling many parts of the country, as my husband at the time was in the military. But I spent 10 years, two different times in California. So therefore, we had the opportunity to not only volunteer time in the UCM office, but also to study with Dr. Stillman, who was a former director of UCM, and of course, work on my doctorate in naturopathy. And so coming from New York State, I had my bachelor's in business management. And so California was where I was going to volunteer my time with UCM, but also work on getting my doctorate in naturopathy. And of course, hypnosis was something that I was really interested in, and it certainly does help in so many ways.
Well, I am so excited to hear about your journey of becoming an ordained minister,
Well,
an ordained reverend, actually.
my as I said, Reverend May Merritt York was when I told her I wanted to become an ordained minister, she said, "Well, you're going to have to do some serious volunteer work." And because I'm in Auburn, where there is the maximum security prison in downtown Auburn, where the electric chair was first used.
Wow.
And so when she told me part of my donating my time as a requirement would be to go into Auburn prison and donate my time and bring programs in. And I thought, I'm not going to go into that prison because it's not something people do. Besides, it had never been done before. And so after the Attica riot in 72, it may have been 71, the state of New York said that they would allow programs to come into the prisons. And there was a group similar to the Elks and the Kiwanis, and they started a chapter in the prison. And of course, they were looking for someone that would help bring in programs, and someone that would be the coordinator of activities as far as workshops. And so when Reverend May told me that this is where I had to do my volunteer work towards my ordination, and of course, she said, if you don't go, I guess you're not interested to become an ordained minister. So I made that effort, and I'm going to ignore that phone call. I should have turned the phone off, but
That's
I'm
okay.
almost 90 and I have senior moments, and I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
And it's a call from actually from someone who should not be calling me right now, because I told them wait until after 3. But then when they don't have a clock in their room, I'm not able to. He can't see the sun, so he's not able to tell time.
Okay. No
But
problem.
anyway,
How about we?
all right. So anyway, I didn't believe that it was possible to find professional volunteers that might come into the prison. But anyway, there was a short article that I wrote and had the newspaper, Auburn paper, put it in. And I had a woman call me who was a CPA. And she said, and it was a woman, of course. Women were more apt to do it, I guess, than men. So I've learned. So anyway, she said I could do a budget workshop, which she did. And she'd go pick up circulars and she would bring those in to do her workshop. So the inmates in her class would learn how to plan their groceries for the week, so that that would help them to understand what was going on as far as budgeting. Anyway, another woman said, I'll teach art classes. Well, she was the wife of an attorney in the Auburn area. And so the local theater group, which I was a member of, they said they'd bring in people that would help with workshop in drama. Well, to make a long story short, we had many people who came forth over a period of that year. And for 3 years, about 25 people came in and did workshops, and some speakers came in with the group. But what's interesting, during that 3 years, and we're talking a maximum security prison, we're about 2,000 inmates, there was never one major incident, and that's unbelievable to happen. And it wasn't until a few years later when I had to testify in court on behalf of an inmate, although my name was also being mentioned as having created some problems in the prison, which I didn't do, and God knew that, but certainly Auburn didn't know it. So I was kind of in trouble with some people in Auburn until I was able to go to court. And the lawyers that came from New York to help the inmate in his suit to be able to continue with his writing his poetry, the organization Poets and Writers, which is a branch of Amnesty International, paid for the lawyers to come to Auburn, where the federal court hearing was held.
Mhm.
And Jerome Washington, it was Washington versus Henderson, federal case. And we're talking about the early 1980s, I think 81, that this happened in Auburn. And on the stand, because I told the lawyers, you got to get those books that prove daily input from the prison of what kinds of incidents happened. And they asked the warden if there had ever been any major incidents during the 3 years that I was coordinating and teaching as well. And he said, no, there was not one major incident. And that's kind of unusual, but we won the case. And so to make a long story short, it was because I volunteered to go in to do those programs. And as a real estate broker at the time, I was no longer able to continue being a real estate broker because the bank that did 95% of mortgages in Cayuga County told me as long as I went into the prison, I could no longer bring any of my purchase offers into that bank. So you see, as I told Reverend May what was happening, and she said, well, you can expect that there's going to be people that don't approve of what you're doing. Well, I sure learned that. Well, anyway, I completed that phase. And actually, there were several hundred hours of my doing volunteer work, and thankfully, people who helped me do it. And so I do have to mention that there was a man 50 years earlier whose statue is in front of the Auburn police station. And his name was, and I'm having a senior moment, I'll get it in a second or two. But anyway, he was a man who in 1902 was a warden for 3 years at Sing Sing. And then later, President Wilson had him be the warden of a prison military prison up in Rhode Island. 2,000 inmates in each. And during that 3-year period that he was at each, there were no major incidents because, as he said, you treat men like men and not animals. So in a way, our group was able to prove that's exactly what can happen. So for the first time, a book has just been written by a professor here at Auburn, and Thomas Mott Osborne, and what he was able to do, and what a group of women, although we did have a couple of men who came in and judged art, that you can have a rather traumatic drama.
Yes.
effect on inmates if you treat them like men and
Human.
not animals.
Yes.
And we proved it. So if we could only get that information out to the rest of the prisons in this country. But
That would
anyway,
be great. So did you do any other volunteer work or any other things for you to become an ordained minister, or did you accomplish that after the 3 years?
there were a number of times that I had to uh, do some of my work. And I know uh, when I was being in the presence of Reverend May, who was the oldest living medium at the time, she worked with Arthur Ford, who was well known at that time in the early 1920s. And she was a medium. And I was beginning to also communicate with spirit. And over the course of the several years in the area, I volunteered my time to do readings at group gatherings. And the money that was paid by those that attended went to that organization. As Reverend May said, use your gift to help others. And the VFW was one place that I did it. I did it for the Historical Society. I have a proof of the Q Museum in a newsletter that I was going to be doing readings over the Halloween weekend and
Mhm.
raised money by doing readings. And I did it for, let's see, a theater group, the Auburn Players. I did it for the Historical Society. So I did it for fundraising for those organizations. So anyway, that was
Is that how um you finished the requirements to
part
become
of the
ordained?
requirements. I actually did well over 10,000 hours of volunteer
Wow.
work.
Holy,
And
and that was
although,
required, 10,000 hours.
well, actually it wasn't, but I just got so totally committed to it that I just continued to do that. But I did come out to UCM, and for 3 years, I volunteered 20 hours a week for 3 years in the office. And while I was there working on my studies, and I also was working to generate income. But anyway, there's a lot more to what can be done to prove that you really want to help others. And it's about helping others. It's just really helping others.
Hmm.
And I could talk for a long time on this subject, but anyway, it was the Reverend Peterson, Bernie Peterson at the time. She was the director, where I in her presence in the audience at a church in San Jose, and I think it was uh, I think it was the one that Mary and Ken at their place that I did
Hmm.
did some
Ordination.
readings.
Oh,
And so I was able to pick up from some messages for people there in the service that were attending. So I actually was able to demonstrate my mediumship in front of Reverend Peterson. So
wow.
yeah.
That was an
So
honor.
anyway, I do pick up still. I do believe in it so strongly. And it wasn't until I traveled to Europe when I was visiting Wales, I had a past life experience. Um,
Wow.
and I write about it in my book called the impossible possibilities.
Hmm.
And of course, I write about many things about myself, but I also did typed a reprint of the only book that was ever done on spiritualism in the very beginning. And
Yeah,
I
I do want to talk to you more about that, but before we move on to the fantastic book and maybe the preface for our next podcast to talk about the details of the book, what would you say to a minister that is in the process or possibly wanting to be in the process of becoming a reverend or ordained? What, like, words of encouragement or um, questions would you ask them so that they know that they're on the right path?
Since there's over 1,600 denominations in this country, and I've done a lot of history research, everybody's trying to figure out how to do this, I guess. But and the fact that we've had the Bible translated over 500 times, I have what I consider the one that's the one that I most prefer, only because the man who wrote it grew up in the same area where Jesus grew up and could speak the language that Jesus spoke, and they still do even today. And he was well educated in England, and he translated, and so his Bible is probably the most closest to what was the original since it's been translated. At the Council of Nicaea in the third century, when they stopped teaching um, reincarnation, when the Catholic Church, which at the time in the third century was the only church, and at that time it was decided that the priest could no longer marry, and there was the first time that there was a split, and the Greeks said no, and they separated at that time, and they said they would continue to allow their priest to marry. So history is so important, but I have to say that the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, where Jesus' words are spoken, really are the most important words you'll ever be able to use. And it works. And if you really want to read the Bible, okay, but it's a lot of history that really isn't going to give you the what you need in order, because everybody knows about Christmas, and I find people that don't even know, even among UCM, when I say to some of them, what was the baby Jesus? What did the three wise men bring? Well, gold and frankincense and myrrh. Well, okay, everybody knows what gold is. But a lot of people don't realize when you go to a Catholic service or an Episcopal service, or some places where they're doing that scent around the service, where they're throwing the incense around you. That's frankincense and myrrh. Well, why would wise men bring frankincense and myrrh? Bet 9 out of 10 people of you don't know.
Doesn't it clear negative energy and
Well,
allow things to open up?
well, what it does is certainly take away evil entities around you, but bring in the right energy and spirit. And I always use it if I'm going to have any group gathering, because I want to keep the air around me free of any negative, because it helps me to do my readings. The importance of frankincense and myrrh, and I mean a good quality, is something that we really need to be sure we are using it. And I always use just a little drop of it on the forehead of people who are in a group reading, where I'm doing a group reading. Only because there's something about knowing that they are, and by the way, in Catholic Church, sometimes that's what they do. They put frankincense, myrrh on their finger. But that's another thing for another day to talk about, frankincense and myrrh. But anyway, now that you can get frankincense and myrrh very easily, but I remember back then it was only in California that I could find it.
Wow.
So anyway, you have to do your homework, and you have to at least maybe have the opportunity to be around someone like Reverend May. She was an amazing, amazing woman. And I was fortunate to have stayed with her a weekend prior to her demise. And I had some paranormal experiences while I visited the day I went to her funeral. She had a chapel at the back end of her house. Turned out that I was born in a house not even a block away.
Wow.
And my mother moved to Auburn when my twin and I were only about 3 months old. But anyway, the importance of ley lines, and that's something I would love to get into in another talk, because I did do one already for UCM. The importance of ley lines is an amazing piece of information, because anyone who goes on the internet and looks up L-E-Y, ley lines, you're going to see a lot of lines going around the earth. And it's only been recently that the University of Massachusetts, 3 doctors who were able to identify the frequency. I'll use the word frequency because that's the easiest word help for people to understand, that emanate around the earth. And now we know, they said, that the birds use those ley lines in the whales and all things that migrate, those energy lines. And of course, their importance as far as where they intersect is critical. And there are only, on the map, you'll see 3 places in the United States where more than 2 or 3 intersect. And one is in Sonoma. Many people know about Sonoma, where people come for healing and so on. Well, that's where several of them cross. And there's also one in Auburn that very few people know about. It's where those mounds were built before the time of the Algonquin Indians. So we're talking hundreds of centuries ago. And there are mounds in several hundred of them throughout Ohio. But the largest ones are in the 3 areas where you see several lines connect. One of them is right here in Auburn. It's a huge mound. You can go up at the top of it in the winter and you can see all around Auburn. But of course, today it's a burial grounds, not for Native Americans, but it was where the Native Americans would go for special healings and for doing and they were very clairvoyant, their people. And then I only learned 2 years ago that I had a different father than my twin. And I was 8 pounds and she was 3 pounds. And so I got accused of taking all the nutrition when really my mother had passed an egg after she was pregnant with me, and then was able to get pregnant with the egg that passed through. And so anyway, I had it.
Wow, that you're like, both of you are miracles.
Yeah, half twin sister with different fathers.
Wow.
And so I only learned 2 years ago I had a different father, et cetera, and that my grandmother is full-blooded Blackfoot Native American.
So you have touched on numerous ideas that
Yes.
I am sure are going to spark a lot of questions.
Yeah, there's so many
One
things
is
around.
the book that you wrote on spiritualism and the birthplace of spiritualism.
Yes, and that's important because although my
Well,
book.
hang on. I don't want to get into that yet. I just want to lay the foundation for future broadcasts for our listeners that are listening to us to be able to tune into the things that you touched on today. So one is the birthplace of spiritualism, which is huge, and the journey that you founded that information is just incredible. And I believe it warrants a podcast all of its own. And the other one you talked about ley lines, and I know a little bit about ley lines because I work with dragons, and I know that dragons heal the ley lines. So I think that that would be a wonderful conversation for a podcast as well. And then you have such an interesting history on becoming a doctor, becoming ordained, and the history of the people that made a difference within UCM. And I think that having a podcast on that information is warranted for another time. But something that especially the new reverends that are coming in, and also the new ministers that are going to be coming in to support and to grow within UCM. I think the history that you have, and most likely several others. We might even be able to have a group session on that for a podcast. I really think that that is needed and warranted. So I look forward to those. But going back to the question of what would you say to an incoming minister or reverend? Yes, we have to volunteer. Yes, doing our homework and doing our due diligence for growing UCM. But what are some encouraging words to help us be, when we're 90, the longest ordained minister within UCM?
When Reverend May said, in order to seek the truth, and Jesus said it, because you'll find it. And the thing is, sometimes when we need an answer, we may not get it back by 2 o'clock, but you have to look for the signs, and the signs will come to you. And if you miss them, and so many times we miss them, but the point is, if you're going to miss them, then those entities, call them entities, spirit guides,
Mhm.
or whatever, they will. They can only do so much to get your attention without having something fall on your head, but that's another story. But the book, I don't want to mislead. The book does tell a reprint of the earliest. Um, it's well documented about the Fox sisters, which were very near from where I lived. But it wasn't only until professional people in Auburn had the girls, the Fox girls, come into their homes, and they formed these circles in the homes of Auburn's elite. So I was able to prove that spiritualism actually started in Auburn, New York, in the homes of the elite. And so, based on my research and what I was able to pull together, I was able to have an exhibit at the History Museum here in Cayuga County, which proved Auburn was where spiritualism really started. And when I say the homes of Auburn's elite, I mean the president of the hospital, the chief of police. I mean, there were people and there are really only just one or two homes still standing today but again, ley lines go through, and wherever ley lines appear, the paranormal experiences are more likely to happen for you. There's a place Santa Cruz where they have a mystery site,
Uh-huh.
and you're where you see can't think of the name. I'm having a senior moment. A compass. I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
Compass doesn't function. Well, it won't function where ley lines cross. So anyway, there's a lot to be said. We'll talk about ley lines at another time because they're
Yeah.
critical. But here we've got several that go through right here in Auburn, New York. No wonder, because where a ley line goes, things can happen. I saw spirits when I was a kid. A lot of children do. But I found out one of those ley lines goes right through the house I grew up in. So no wonder. So ley lines are something we need to know more about. Anyway, even though my book does cover a reprint of some of what was history, I tell about some things that have happened in my life. But you've got to be more aware of what's possible, because Jesus said all things are possible.
Yeah.
And the thing is, now that we do have people who believe in the existence of another, call it another lifetime, but we do come back again and again and again. It's kind of a repeat performance, but hopefully this time we can get a few more pluses, because we're here until we truly have awareness. And then I guess we get to, I did a cartoon once, I'll have to show it sometime, where it says God is speaking to his angels, and he said when they've gotten to a point of enlightenment, and over to the side in the cartoon is a spaceship that says, yes, we'll beam them up, right, Scotty? And so the point is, we're here till we actually gain the awareness of the truth. And we make mistakes. It's okay. The boss, meaning the boss, he's keeping the list and checking it twice. I thought I'd mention, as if you don't already know that. But anyway, you have to be aware that we're never alone. And of course, when we do make the transition, well, there it is, some proof there. But we do have to come back again and again for many reasons. But at least be aware that of history, and the fact that after 500 translations of the Bible, we have a problem even there. But the words Jesus spoke are really very much there. And so
So
make it easy.
you've mentioned the Bible a few times, and some people listening to this will actually feel that the Bible is spiritualism. Can you define what spiritualism is?
Spiritual is the opportunity to grow with the knowledge that there is possibility, to gain the insight, the awareness of what is there, and believe when Jesus said all things are possible, and that your spirit guide is with you, whether you want to call it spirit guide or your angel. We're never alone. And the point is, some people can develop their ability to see spirit. And in hypnosis, as you and I would be hooked up to a brainwave machines. I've actually seen that demonstration. Actually had one on me. But when you and I are talking, we're in beta, right?
Uh-huh.
But when you go to sleep, you go into alpha, right?
Yes.
That's okay. It's only in alpha that you're going to see spirit. Okay.
Is
That's why
that
people
why
say,
you could see spirit a lot of times when you're either in meditation or in an awake meditation?
true, if you can go into alpha, now you have an awareness. And then, of course, theta is very deep, deep sleep, and where surgery can be done. That was proven by 3 medical doctors that were in Korea when we were surrounded at the Chosin Reservoir, and they had no anesthesia, so they used hypnosis. They would tell the man, either we can tie you down or we can hypnotize you. And there were a number of men who were hypnotized, and the AMA accepted hypnosis because of that experience that happened in Korea. History is important. But if you're hypnotized, and that can put you down into theta, and
Uh-huh.
there we can work on you, and you can recover so many hundreds of sessions. And I heard a psychiatrist say it to a group of other psychiatrists. Why are we spending several sessions when we can do it in so few with hypnosis? Well, you know why. It's called
Yeah.
money, money, money. So anyway, wake up to what's possible, because Jesus said all things are possible. Well, now we have a little bit of an idea of some of the things we have to pay attention to. So I feel like in my searching for the truth, I stumbled into it, and sometimes when you truly are a seeker, you will find the truth. And, I'm not perfect. I can't walk on water. I promise I can't. And it'll take a lot of flack for doing and believing. It was a lot worse back in the 60s and 70s. Hey,
Yeah,
listen, back a few centuries ago, you got burned at the stake. Come on.
that's true.
Even a midwife was burned at the stake. History will tell you that the herbalist and the clairvoyance, and a lot of it is, what, boo poo, I'll say. I'm sorry.
That's
You know
okay.
what? You've got
But
to be,
we are definitely in an awakening phase,
it's true.
as society is awakening, more prevalent, I feel,
Yeah.
nowadays. But with all of that, I mean, what a jam-packed 20 minutes or 30 minutes that we have. And Joyce, I just really want to thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to talk to you again very soon, on those other subjects.
Books on
So,
parapsychology, important. Many
what
of
was
them.
that?
Many books are out there now on parapsychology. And so much of it was trash. And there were several professional people that we read books and books and books, came up with 50 of books that were credible, reliable, donated them to the local library. That was the most books taken out of the library after that. And we're talking the 70s. But
Wow.
because it was a professional group of people, some of who came into the prison, okay, even a doctor whose husband was a professor of philosophy at Syracuse University. His wife had her doctorate, and she came in and did handwriting. She was a handwriting expert who testified in professional hearings for 2 people whose signature was in fact the signature of the decedent. So don't tell me there isn't things that can't be discovered and understood. You have books on parapsychology, but there's so many of them that are trash.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
you
unfortunate. Well,
got to have the truth. It was
today society's getting rid of our history anyway. So yes, I
good,
really
good.
believe that
Thank you.
those that have the ability to tap into history is definitely key. But with that, I just want to say thank you so much. And in the comments, or I mean in the information for the podcast, I will put a link to your book, and then that's how they will be able to find you. I will also, if it's okay with you, give them your email so that if they have any questions based on the information that you said, that they can email you as well. And I look forward to being able to interview you again on several things.
Amazon is the book link, and the any profit I get from the book goes to UCM.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Well, that will make UCM very happy. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and
Wake up to the truth.